Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It is Wednesday, September 6, 2017, and today we'll be introducing the new version of Genesis R&D, which will be version 11.4. There's some really exciting new features that we will be demoing today. As always, updates are available to any customer who is current on their priority support. If you have questions about that, please contact sales@esha.com. ESHA research was established in 1981 with the goal of providing a comprehensive nutrition database with few missing values. Part of that goal was to stay up to date on our compliance solutions, which include software for packaged food and restaurant labeling, software for supplement labeling, and software for nutrition and diet analysis. We also offer consulting services in which our specialists can help you accomplish desired labeling goals for small or large projects. The software we are focusing on today is Genesis R&D Food version 11.4. This program was created in 1991, shortly after the NLEA laws were introduced. The program can create both old and new format for the U.S. Nutrition Fact panels, as well as produce compliant Canadian, Mexico, and EU label formats. And today, this program gets a big boost. Some upcoming webinars, the next one that we have planned will be in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks minus a day, Tuesday, September 19th, and we will focus on ways to share data internally and externally with the ESHA workflow tools. We will cover various options for importing and exporting your ingredients, recipes, reports, and labels, as well as the benefits of each technique. To register for future webinars or access any old webinars, please use the link listed below. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and will be emailed to all attendees in a follow-up after the webinar. Please feel free to ask questions along the way by using the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. You can chat to our staff who are waiting on hand to answer any questions you guys may have. All right, so today's agenda. As I said, we'll focus on the new various features and partnerships of the Genesis R&D version 11.4. I will introduce each feature, and then Ben, my colleague, will demonstrate the use of the feature in Genesis. We'll talk about the new ability to attach documents in Genesis, which we're really excited about. We have some enhanced label options for small packages, as well as the option to use the rounding rules featured in the FDA guidance document released in January 2017. We'll also cover the new feature which allows users to create nutrient content claims based off the new and old daily value targets. Another new feature is the ability to access online help straight from the tool. And lastly, we're honored to have Greg Nowacki, CEO from TraceGains, join us today to speak to the new solution ESHA and TraceGains have created to help streamline the supplier documentation process. And as always, we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end. All right, our first new feature is the ability to attach documents to Genesis. I'm sure many of you are very excited about it. I know we are. Why do we do this? Because you requested it. Any document, be it a supplier specification sheet, a recipe in Excel format, or internal communication, could be attached to an ingredient, a recipe, an advanced label, or a food menu. We hope this simplifies your compliance process tremendously. Ben, can you show us how to attach these documents in Genesis?
Absolutely. I'd like to point out one thing before I get into the software that we hadn't mentioned quite yet. This update version 11.4 is not available quite yet. It should be available in September. We don't have a firm date yet, but hopefully before the end of the month we'll have this available. So you can't download it from the website yet, but very soon. I'll go ahead and switch over into the Genesis software now from our slide deck. We'll take a look at the file attachments part of the Genesis application. So I'll go ahead and open up an existing recipe that I have just so we can take a look at where that'll be found. Open up our sample fruit salad recipe. Inside of a recipe, you'll find the file attachment area under Edit Recipe. So if I go to Edit Recipe now, we see a new option at the very bottom of these tabs here with attachments. Within the attachments, we'll see the files that we actually have attached into this specific recipe. The files are loaded inside of the Genesis database, and they are attached directly to a specific recipe, ingredient, food menu, or advanced label. So any of those item types can have a file attached to them, and the file structure doesn't matter. If you want to attach a PDF or a picture or a Word document, Excel spreadsheet, any of those sorts of files will work. And if we want to add the file attachment here, we can simply go into the Browse option. So we click Browse at the bottom of the window here. and then we go, I just have my desktop selected here, and I have my multi-column report for my sample fruit salad from today selected that I've printed out that report already. We go and hit open, and we upload that file directly into it. You'll have the name of the file added on the first column here, the date that it was uploaded in our second column, and then we can add a description into our file as well. So we just click into this file description area. We can say multi-column report from September 6th. So you can add a little bit of information if you would like about that file as well. For past files that you have, if you'd like to open that up or view it, you can simply right click on the file here, and you can either download the file, save it onto your computer, open it up. So I can just click open here, and it opens it up in my Adobe PDF viewer to view that file. Go back into Genesis, or we can delete those files as well, of course. We can select that there. Again, let's go ahead and show one more example here. If we open up a existing ingredient, see what I got here. I've got an ingredient here. In the ingredients, same idea. It'll be the bottom tab inside of your ingredient attachments. We can add attachments here. The exact same process is here, so I'm not going to add another attachment, but we see the idea of you can add any sorts of files into your Genesis application.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I know that's going to make my life a lot easier, so I hope you guys are excited about that. All right, we'll move on to our next sort of grouping of features, which would be label enhancement options. So I'll go through a few slides here, and then we'll hand it over to Ben to show you all three of these. So the first one is going to be the shortened label. The shortened label option is the idea that we can remove nutrients that report to 0 and put them into this not a significant source footnote down here. Previously in Genesis, we were able to do this using the simplified label, and what would happen is every single nutrient that was reporting to 0 was pulled off and put into that footnote. We've now taken this one step further. We're allowing you to choose which nutrients go into the footnote and which nutrients are left on the label. So you can see here that I am showing that it is not a significant source of trans fat, cholesterol, and total sugars. However, I'm still showing my vitamin D at 0 micrograms on my label. And that's going to be found in edit label. So let's go on to the next enhancement. The next one will be for small packages, and small packages are products that qualify for either the tabular or linear labels. The goal here would be trying to get the smallest label possible. I think a lot of our customers out there are often trying to save space on their packaging, and this is what hopefully some of these features can help with. So these new features include removing the quantitative data, and hiding the %DV footnote in both the tabular and linear labels. We did this because you requested it, and it is part of the CFR, and we again find this in the edit label format options. The sort of last in our grouping here would be having to do with the rounding rules that were laid out in the draft guidance released in January 2017 by the FDA. In that document, the FDA laid out a new way for industry to approach rounding rules. The general idea here is that it may be impractical for manufacturers to be expected to maintain precision of certain nutrients to the levels that were previously written due to the variation in food supply. So because food is natural and it's grown in many different places, depending on the type of soil or the season, there is variation within the nutrients and minerals within our food. So for this new guidance, the quantitative amount, for example, of vitamin and minerals with an RDI of 500 or greater should be rounded to the nearest 10 milligrams or 10 micrograms per serving. So you can see on this chart that calcium is suggested to be rounded to the nearest 10 milligrams rather than the nearest 1 milligram that it was previously stated. So the level of precision it's a little bit impossible that we can get to, say, 1,301 milligrams of calcium. However, rounding that to the nearest 10 milligrams can provide a little bit better range for us. So Ben, can you take it away and show us those three new features?
Absolutely. Let's get back over into the Genesis application. I'll use the same recipe that I had open before. We'll take a look at our label. Give it a second to open up here. So right now we have a US 2016 label showing up. The first piece that we'll go into is the draft guidance, which is the last thing that Maya had pointed out. All of these options are going to be under the format options area, with one small caveat there, but for the using draft guidance for the different rounding rules, that's going to be right here under the use FDA draft guidance for nutrient rounding. Check that box and it'll change it from the more precise old or original rounding rules into that new draft guidance rounding rule. So you can select that off and on. We can hit OK and we'll see that I've got my calcium changes here. Yeah, my calcium went from 16 to 20. We can apply that very easily. And then same with our hide quantitative values and show insignificant footnote. Quantitative values obviously will only apply into, as Maya had mentioned, the tabular and linear labels. So we'll go ahead and select a tabular label now. If we check our hide quantitative values, will now be only showing the %DV for the vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. And then the last piece here was the show insignificant footnote. And this one has a little bit of extra pieces to it. So I'll go ahead and go back to a standard label and show that statement. So now we've got a statement that says, not a significant source of trans fat, cholesterol, vitamin D, calcium, iron. As Maya mentioned in the original part of the application with the simplified labels, you could do that very easily and put all of those nutrients into the statement. If you would like to select a nutrient or two to not go into that statement, to stay in the main body of the label, that's going to be under our nutrient options. So each individual nutrient now will have a setting to push that back. So if we want a vitamin D to stay in the bulk of the label instead of that statement, simply scroll down to vitamin D, open that up, and then we have this option now that says show nutrient on the label even when insignificant. If I check that, hit OK, it takes vitamin D out of the statement and back into the main label. So you have a lot of control here on which exact nutrients you would like to show. Like previous versions of Genesis, maybe a slightly lesser known setting here, you can save and load these settings as well. So if there was a specific exact way you would like these labels to show up, if for every smaller package label you're creating, you wanted fat and cholesterol and calcium, or trans fat, cholesterol, calcium, iron to show in the not a significant source of statement, vitamin D to stay in the main, we can select this save settings button here and save that setting to either load for a new recipe later, or we can set that as a default inside of our preferences as well. So just know that you don't necessarily have to go in every single time, every recipe you ever create, and manually set every single one of these settings individually. You do have some control over there to save and load setting sets.
Awesome, thanks. Some great tips there, Ben. And I wanted to add one more thing having to do with the rounding rules. We would suggest that you remain consistent. So if you decide to do that for your whole entire product lineup. And if you decide not to, then don't click that button at all. So that's one last tip before we move on to nutrient content claims. So you guys may remember, I hope so by now, that there have been changes in the daily values as part of the new regulations. Here's a couple of examples of some increases and some decreases, and I wanted to remind you this to put nutrient content claims into a new context. So our next feature that we are showing today is the ability to have nutrient content claims be based off of the new 2016 daily value targets. When all of these regulations were first released, the FDA said that they were going to be evaluating the nutrient content claims for 2016, and there was a bit of a delay, and we didn't really hear anything. So we did reach out to the FDA and ask them how we should approach this for our program and for our customers. And so we were given some direction via their email support line. We were advised to use the original nutrient content claim percentages with the new %DVs. So now in Genesis, we have the option of showing nutrient content claims based on either the old or new regulations. In this example here down at the bottom, you can see how a nutrient content claim could change over time with the changes in daily value. So in 1990, our vitamin C target was 60 milligrams. If I had 8 milligrams of vitamin C, I was able to make a good source of vitamin C nutrient content claim. So I was at 13%. However, with these new daily value targets, vitamin C is now at 90 milligrams. And so if I take my 8 milligrams of vitamin C, I'm actually only around 8% vitamin C, which does not qualify for any nutrient content claims. So keep in mind that with these changes, your nutrient content claims could be affected, but now you do have the ability to either work in the new or old claims, and that will be driven by which label type you're in. So Ben will show us how to access that in Genesis now.
Absolutely. Let me switch back over into Genesis and we'll take a look at that. So we're still going to use the same fruit salad sample recipe that we've had before. I'll go ahead and change my label over into a US 1990 label now so we can take a look at that. With our 1990 label, I had vitamin A at 2%. And if we look into edit recipe, I think I was using the exact, I'm sorry, I wasn't going to use vitamin A. I was going to use vitamin C. Talking about the wrong nutrient there. Sorry about that. But vitamin C at 15%. We see I've done a override, so we have exactly 8 milligrams of vitamin C in our recipe currently. So if we go over into our nutrient content claims for this recipe now using a 1990 label that we see here for this recipe, we can expand out our vitamin C. It says we're at 15% DV. So we do qualify for a claim based on the 1990 regulations. We're going to be at between 10 and 19%. So we see we do make a claim now based on vitamin C of a good source. But as Maya mentioned, with this version here, if we change our label over to a 2016 label, hit OK. Let me go ahead and add vitamin C as a voluntary nutrient onto our label so we can take a look at that. Vitamin C now shows 8 milligrams and 8%. So the percent DV has dropped a lot because the daily value has changed for the new regulation. So now if we go into our claims, it takes a second to open back up again. We now don't meet any claims because we're at 8% DV. Again, we can scroll down into this, see good source still says it's 10 to 19%, but since the daily value requirement has changed, our percent DV has changed, and so our nutrient content claim has changed accordingly. The next piece that we're going to look at for this update is our DataLink integration. So our DataLink integration is an add-on tool that connects the TraceGains items that you have into Genesis R&D. Why we want this? To streamline supplier ingredient updates, eliminate redundancy, and eliminate that manual data entry that you have to do over and over again. The database menu inside of Genesis is where you'll find that. The icon most likely will be grayed out for you to start with. This is a purchasable add-on, so it's not something that comes with the update automatically. You do have to have an account with TraceGains, which we'll go to in just a moment. We have Gary to talk about that. We'll have to purchase the add-on with Genesis and have a TraceGains account. And how this works, review all your TraceGains ingredients and link them to the items in the Genesis R&D database or create new items. And again, we'll go through some of that information in just a moment. Inside of the application, we see kind of some partnership here. The flow, you start with the TraceGains requests a new item. The supplier uploads that requested data into TraceGains. Genesis pulls the supplier data from TraceGains, and the data is then reviewed and imported into the Genesis R&D system. Now I'm going to go ahead and let Gary Nowacki, the CEO of TraceGains, take it over. He has a little bit of information he wants to show. For those that don't know about TraceGains, he has some information he'd like to show off. So Gary, take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Ben. Welcome again, everyone. For everybody who's not familiar with TraceGains, we have a simple goal at TraceGains. It's a simple but also lofty goal, which is to revolutionize information exchange across the food and CPG supply chain. And we've never talked to a food or CPG company that is not frustrated in some fashion with how they collect information from their suppliers upstream in their supply chain. It is a difficult and often cumbersome, inefficient process for them to do that. And so when you're having a lofty goal like revolutionizing information exchange, The first thing that is important is to have a lot of companies that have signed on to this. So we've been working very hard over the years at TraceGains to build up a customer base of very large companies, from Nestle, which is the largest food and beverage company in the world, on down across very large companies, all these national brands that you see. They have all bought into this concept. But what's also important to understand with TraceGains is that smaller companies, as small as a single site, family-run company that's relatively small in scale, they can use the exact identical software, take advantage of all those benefits. So all of these solutions are completely scalable. If you use a fraction of the benefits, you pay a fraction of the price as a smaller company. So how do we go about revolutionizing information exchange across the supply chain? It really falls into two buckets of problems. The first one is how suppliers and customers interact and shuffle all these documents and pieces of data back and forth. What we find previous to TraceGains Network is companies were doing it in a whole variety of fashions. There were single-use portals that people had to sign on to just to meet the needs of one specific customer. Then they might need to sign on to another single-use portal for a different customer, re-upload all the same information. It was a very frustrating process. Or there are a lot of emails flying around, or even fax machines and paper-based things. The second problem is, after you've collected that data, how do you bring it alive? How do you extract data off of all of these forms to meet FSMA requirements? Just one example of that is FSMA would ask companies to do a risk assessment of all their suppliers, and especially foreign suppliers mandated by Section 301 of FSMA. With TraceGains, we automatically extract all the data off these documents, put it on predefined risk dashboards, and alert you where you are at highest risk for the suppliers you're doing business with and the specific items you're purchasing from those suppliers. If you're certified to a GFSI scheme, such as BRC and SQF, and many of you are, those also require that you do a lot of information gathering and extraction and analysis. And so TraceGains helps in those regards. So one example that illuminates this and is an aha moment for a lot of folks is, this is an actual supplier. We call them Supplier X because these are about 35 of their customers that they do business with, and obviously this is a confidential supply chain. But prior to TraceGains, what Supplier X would do is they would get requests from all of these 35 different customers for one particular document, such as a nutrition document. But they'd get the request over and over and over again. And they'd have to stop what they were doing and send an email or log on to some special custom portal to fulfill the request for each of these customers. So it was 35 different events. But it's much worse than that, because there's maybe 20 different documents that each of these customers require from this supplier. So you do the math, we're already up to 700 inefficient processes here. But it's much worse than that, because that's if the supplier was only selling one item or one ingredient to all these companies. And typically suppliers are not. They're supplying dozens or even hundreds of items. So now we're into the thousands of difficult events having to send information between suppliers and customers. With TraceGains and TraceGains Network, what the supplier does is they do things completely differently. They connect with all of their customers, and it's very similar to how you connect on social networks with like Facebook or LinkedIn. You connect to each of these customers, and then Supplier X goes ahead and deposits each of these documents once into the TraceGains Network cloud. And as long as they're connected to their customers, the document just automatically propagates out to all of their customers who require that document. The supplier doesn't have to lift a finger, and the customers don't have to lift a finger, badgering these suppliers, hey, I still don't have your document's expired, your document's missing, what have you. So it's brought radical efficiency to the food and CPG supply chain. As Ben was mentioning, what this allows us to do now is, after we've collected the documents and the suppliers have uploaded the documents into TraceGains network, with TraceGains, the second key thing we do is we extract all the necessary data off the documents. We extract all the values for all the nutritional attributes, for example, sodium, calcium, and so on and so forth, and put that into a true database. And now that data is automatically integrated with Genesis so that you don't have to go through the further manual headache of having to retranscribe and re-enter all that data, potentially making mistakes along the way. The data just automatically flows into the Genesis application. I have one last slide, which was what we were talking about is the supplier management application. And I just wanted to let folks know that with TraceGains, we do also have a complete product suite. So we also have something called supplier compliance. The SC application is an optional additional module for our customers to control all of their suppliers' incoming lots. It does things, for example, like automatically digitize their certificates of analysis, break all that data down, and notify you anytime a supplier ships you a lot that does not meet your specifications. The specifications publishing or SP application allows you to maintain and publish your specifications out to all your suppliers so they have advance warning on your needs. And then lastly, the quality management product allows you to manage and collect all the electronic records within your facility for your critical control points and everything that needs to be done. Auditors love this because when they come out, you're not having to scramble for 3-ring binders and files to prove to them that at the start of every line you calibrated the metal detector or that you swabbed for pathogens at the exact prescribed intervals. It tracks all that and gives you a complete record of all that and makes it very, very searchable. So now I'll turn it back over to the folks from ESHA.
Thank you so much for going over all that. And we'll go ahead and take a look inside of the Genesis application now. And like you said, one of the biggest pieces here of the reasons behind all of this is to eliminate the redundant data entry. So most people that have TraceGains currently are taking the data that they get from TraceGains, manually entering it into Genesis right now, either by creating a new ingredient in the software, maybe using ESHA to import it in bulk, but still no automation to that system. So looking at the Genesis program now, I'll go ahead and close these recipes because I don't need to see those now. To get into the TraceGains DataLink plugin, we go into the database tab here, and then we have a DataLink button here. Again, once you update to 11.4, once it is available, if this is grayed out, you can contact the ESHA sales team, and we can help you out getting that set up. If you don't have a current TraceGains account, we can certainly have contacts. Gary can help you out with that, or Gary can contact you to their salespeople. And the ESHA people can help out with getting the DataLink up and running. Opening up the DataLink option now, we have two different sides of this window. We have the left side, which are the items that are available to be linked, to be imported in. And then the right side is kind of a breakdown of what that item is. So a lot of these items, you'll see the different statuses here that we have. All of the items that I currently have showing are a broken link because it's a test database. So of course, this isn't an actual working, client's database of items, but all these items with the broken link icon here, the red link, are items that are coming in from TraceGains and don't have anything associated with them inside of ESHA yet. If you do have an item, we'll have a different icon. I can't recall what that is off the top of my head, but you'll have a different icon basically that will allow you to update items as well. So if you have an item that was changed by TraceGains, you can then resync it to that same ingredient that you have inside of the ESHA database already. If we click on an item here, we have a few options on the right side here. We see the item that shows up. We can search for this item inside of the Genesis application. So if you know you have this ingredient, and this will probably happen a lot with the startup of this, since you probably have a lot of your data. If you have TraceGains, a lot of your data in the Genesis database already. If you have an item that's already in there, maybe the name is slightly different, you named it something slightly different inside of Genesis than TraceGains has the exact name for, you can change the name here and search for it. We see, hit the search button. We see I don't have any results for this ingredient yet. So what we can do now is just create a new item. So I don't have this item in my database. We create this new item, change the icon to a checkbox, and if we go back up to it, it'll then show the changes that are being made. So we see the changes in nutrients here. Obviously, this is a brand new ingredient. So the existing ESHA research side is blank because it's a new ingredient, and this shows the nutrients that TraceGains is gonna pull into it. I have one other example that I'll use here. I have this oil spruce. With this one, I do have an existing item in my database. So with this one, we have the search here that's going out, and it's actually found an item inside of my database that links up to it. So I just kind of created some dummy information here. We've got a couple of nutrients that match up exactly to what TraceGains is trying to import in, but then quite a few nutrients that are blank. So I've only got calcium and calories filled out for my ingredient. All the other ones we have here. So with this, we can simply select this item and it'll update that item for us. And again, you have the option to either create, skip, continue to use the existing item. I've got 190 items, so I obviously won't select every single one of these. Note that at this point, I've linked a couple of items. It hasn't actually updated inside of Genesis yet. So just clicking on the Create Item button isn't actually going to update Genesis yet. You do have to go into, there's a button that says Update Items. It'll say the number of items you're going to update. Clicking this item will then start the process inside of the Genesis program to actually pull that data in. So once you click on that, the process will go and those ingredients will actually be created.
Wonderful. Wow, what a great rundown. Thanks both of you, Gary and Ben. I can't wait to see how all of that works out, and I'm really excited for all of our customers and for both of us as well. If you guys out there that are listening are encouraged by what you're seeing and want to learn a bit more, especially about these new features, here are our remaining trainings that we have for the year. We've got an advanced workshop in Lombard in September in just a couple weeks, a Genesis professional training, as well as an advanced training, both in the same week. The professional is in Washington, D.C., and the advanced will be in Portland. That's the week of October 10th. And then one last Genesis professional training in Anaheim will be the week of December 7th and 8th. And if you'd like more information about that, you can contact training@esha.com. Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. I'll go ahead and take the next question. The next question is, what qualifies for tabular and linear labels? And this is a great question because a couple of our features had to do with using tabular and linear labels. How that goes is if the package does not have enough continuous vertical space, about 3 inches, to accommodate a standard side-by-side label, or the standard vertical, excuse me, and or the available labeling space is 40 square inches or less, you may use the tabular label. And if all of that still remains the same and you still can't get it on your package, you can use that smaller linear label. So that's kind of how you decipher that. A next question that came in is going to be for Gary. So Gary, this is a question about TraceGains. We got a lot of questions about how many ingredients and suppliers are currently in TraceGains. Can you explain how ingredients and suppliers get added to TraceGains?
Yeah, TraceGains network grows literally every week, and over the past several years, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. As of today, we have over 7,000 supplier locations in TraceGains network. I don't know off the top of my head how many ingredients that is, because I'm sure the average is more than 1 per supplier, but it is, I don't know, probably a big 6-figure number of ingredients out there. But it's over 7,000 supplier locations representing over 4,000 supplier entities across 48 companies. And so that's the size of the network. And like I said, it grows every day and is becoming probably more and more of a de facto industry standard for the exchange of information between suppliers and customers.
Incredible. It's very, very great. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate that. One last question we got this question a few times, and I'll take the answer on this one, has to do with the attachments in Genesis. The question was, is there a limit to how many attachments can be added to Genesis? That's a great question. There is not a limit to the number of files that you can add per ingredient or per recipe. However, if you're using a local database, which is the default database installation, the file size limit is going to be 10 gigabytes. So if you're using your own full SQL server, storage will vary depending on your edition. So if you have questions more specifically about that, you can contact support@esha.com. And looks like we have another question that's coming in. Are you able to create a label with the 2016 NLEA requirements in the version before 11.4? Ben, can you answer that one for us?
Absolutely, yes. Those were available before. The version that the new 2016 label was released in was Genesis version 11.2, I'm fairly certain of, which was released in July of last year, 2016. So it has been in Genesis for a little over a year now, the new label.
Perfect. Thank you. At that point, I believe we're going to wrap it up for the day. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Gary from TraceGains, for being here. As I mentioned, we're very excited about the partnership. As a reminder, this will be emailed out to you. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next time.